The stars stretched endlessly outside the panoramic viewport of the Aurora's veil, their light flickering like tiny fires across the black sea of space. Lieutenant Kayla, a Zyran navigator, sat rigidly in her chair, her long fingers resting lightly on the console in front of her. The empty seat beside her felt like a silent challenge. It had remained unclaimed since the start of the mission, a spot reserved for a co-pilot, someone who could share the responsibilities of guiding the ship through the dangerous sectors ahead. Normally, it would have been occupied by another Zyran, a colleague who understood every nuance of the ship and every subtle reading of the star charts. But today, it was empty. Kayla's tail flicked irritably. She did not like uncertainty, and the human pilot assigned to their mission was the very definition of unpredictability. Humans were different. Stories of their recklessness, their strange customs, and their unique problem-solving abilities had reached even the remote sectors of Zyran space. Most Zyrans treated humans with caution, some with suspicion, and a few, like Kayla, were simply uneasy. She preferred precision, control, and order. Humans offered none of that. The ship hummed beneath her. The soft vibration of the engine resonated through the deck, a constant reminder of the journey ahead. Their mission was simple on paper but dangerous in practice. Escort a convoy of research vessels through the Urith Nebula, a vast, unstable region where natural energy storms and rogue drones made travel hazardous. Kayla had prepared meticulously. Every route, every possible hazard, every contingency had been mapped out in her mind and recorded in the ship's systems. She had hoped to travel alone, or at least with someone predictable. A soft chime echoed through the deck, signaling the docking of the transport pod. Kayla's ears twitched, and she straightened in her seat. She had heard the announcements, of course, but there was something about seeing the pod arrive, about knowing that the human was finally here, that made her stomach tighten. The hatch hissed as it opened, and the human stepped out. Lieutenant Daniel Reeves moved with a calm, deliberate pace. He was not like the humans Kayla had read about in reports, loud, brash, or prone to unnecessary risk. He moved quietly, scanning the ship, noting every panel and gauge with a practiced eye. There was a sense of confidence in his posture, a quiet assurance that unsettled Kayla more than any display of aggression could have. Without ceremony, Daniel walked to the empty seat beside her. He did not bow, he did not ask permission, he simply lowered himself into the chair, his hands resting lightly on his knees. Kayla stared at him. Her instinct was to demand he move, to assert control over the cockpit, but something in the human's presence held her back. He exuded calm, a steady certainty that contrasted sharply with her own nervous energy. "Lieutenant Kayla," he said, his voice smooth and even. "I'm here to assist. Let's make this trip safe and efficient." His words were polite, but they carried no unnecessary flourish, no deferential tone to her rank. It was strange. She nodded curtly, her voice tight. "Efficiency is key. The nebula is unstable. Any miscalculation, even a minor one, could destroy the convoy. Let's proceed carefully." The convoy relied on the Aurora's veil for protection, and Kayla carried the responsibility heavily on her shoulders. As the ship edged closer to the nebula, Daniel began to adjust minor settings, moving controls in a way that complemented Kayla's calculations. He did not speak much, only making occasional observations, noting fluctuations in energy readings and small anomalies in the ship's path. Kayla found herself watching him, curious despite her initial unease. He seemed attuned to the ship in a way she could not explain. Every adjustment he made seemed natural, almost instinctive. "Your calculations are solid," he said quietly after a moment, not looking at her. "I'll follow your lead, but I have some suggestions for minor adjustments to optimize our trajectory." The trajectory has been verified by 3 separate algorithms and double-checked by my calculations. There is little room for error. But as she looked into his calm eyes, she realized that he genuinely believed he could help. Against her better judgment, she allowed him to proceed. The first few moments were tense. The ship hummed as Daniel's adjustments took effect. Kayla watched the readouts closely, ready to counteract any mistake, but nothing went wrong. In fact, the trajectory smoothed, the sensors aligned better than before, and the ship glided through the first stretch of the nebula with an elegance that surprised her. Kayla's ears twitched. "You've done this before," she said, trying to keep her tone neutral. Daniel shrugged lightly. "A few times, not exactly like this, but similar enough. I have a method for reading the ship and the environment simultaneously. It helps me predict what might happen next." The ship entered a region where the nebula's energy currents twisted violently, throwing off the sensors. Warning lights flashed across the deck. Kayla tensed, her hands moving swiftly over the controls. She was accustomed to being in command, to relying on her training and the ship's systems. But this time, she felt a hand on a lever next to her, steadying the control. Daniel had begun to make small, precise corrections, countering the turbulence before it could affect their path. Kayla's heart raced. She did not like sharing control, and yet she could not deny that his intervention worked. The ship's path stabilized, the warning lights dimmed, and the view outside the viewport returned to the swirling, beautiful chaos of the nebula. For the first time, Kayla allowed herself a deep breath. The human beside her was calm, confident, and effective. He had done nothing dramatic, nothing reckless. He had simply chosen to sit in the empty seat, observe, and act with careful precision. And it had worked. The rest of the crew watched from their stations, whispering quietly among themselves. The arrival of the human had been met with skepticism, and some had doubted that a human could handle the ship's complex systems. Yet here he was, seated calmly beside Kayla, guiding the Aurora's veil through the unpredictable currents of the nebula without incident. Kayla glanced at him again. "You may stay here," she said quietly, almost to herself. For now, the empty seat beside her was no longer just a symbol of uncertainty. It was now a seat of partnership, tentative though it might be. Hours passed as the Aurora's veil glided deeper into the nebula. Energy currents danced like ribbons of color, occasionally sparking and flaring across the viewport. Kayla and Daniel worked in near silence, communicating with subtle gestures and occasional words. The human's calm presence became almost a grounding force, a steady rhythm that allowed Kayla to focus her mind and react with clarity. A sudden alert flashed on the main screen. "Multiple unidentified drones approaching from the starboard side," Kayla announced, her voice steady but tense. Daniel's hands moved over the controls almost instinctively. "I see them," adjusting trajectory slightly. "Follow my lead." Not blind trust, not unthinking reliance, but a careful, growing confidence in the human beside her. He had chosen the empty seat calmly, without fanfare, and in doing so had begun to change her perception of humans. As the first wave of drones receded into the distance, Kayla allowed herself a brief smile. The mission was far from over, and challenges awaited them in the heart of the nebula. But for the first time, she was not alone in facing them. The empty seat beside her had been filled, not by a colleague, but by someone she had once doubted. And already he was proving that perhaps humans had more to offer than anyone had imagined. The stars beyond the viewport stretched endlessly, mysterious and untamed. Kayla leaned back slightly in her chair, glancing at the human beside her. "We will see what comes next," she said quietly. Daniel nodded, together. The Aurora's veil moved carefully through the swirling clouds of the Urith Nebula. Colorful tendrils of energy twisted and flickered around the ship, making the stars behind them shimmer like distant flames. Lieutenant Kayla kept her eyes glued to the main viewport, her fingers dancing over the controls as she calculated every possible shift in the nebula's unpredictable currents. The seat beside her was no longer empty. Daniel Reeves, the human pilot, sat calmly, his hands lightly resting on the console. His presence was steady, almost like the nebula itself could not disturb him. Kayla was still adjusting to his quiet confidence. He had proven himself in the first leg of the journey, stabilizing the ship when turbulence from the energy currents threatened to throw them off course. But this part of the nebula was deeper, darker, and far less predictable. Reports from other fleets indicated that rogue drones, automated and aggressive, often hunted ships here, and energy storms could knock out systems without warning. Kayla had trained for every contingency, every calculation, yet the unpredictability of humans, Daniel included, still made her uneasy. "Lieutenant Kayla," Daniel said quietly, his eyes scanning a set of readouts she had barely noticed. "We may encounter a region of unstable currents ahead. It could interfere with the convoy's navigation. If we adjust our path slightly now, we can avoid potential damage. The ship will handle small corrections better than it will handle sudden shocks." "Fine," she said finally, her voice tight. "Make the adjustments." Almost immediately, small energy spikes in the nebula that had threatened to knock the ship off course began to dissipate before they could impact the hull. Kayla's ears twitched in surprise. "Your method, it works," she admitted, her voice quiet. "But it is unusual." "It's worked so far." Warning lights flickered, signaling sudden spikes of interference in the hull's shielding. Kayla reacted immediately, adjusting stabilizers and recalibrating shields. Daniel mirrored her actions, but he also made subtle moves she had not anticipated, shifting the ship slightly to minimize energy stress. The two worked together seamlessly, though Kayla had only recently begun to trust him. Suddenly, a series of blips appeared on the radar. Multiple unidentified drones approaching from the starboard side, Kayla said, her voice tight with tension. They are faster than anything we've seen before. Follow my adjustments. Daniel anticipated the drones' movements before they could strike, guiding the ship in smooth, controlled arcs that minimized the risk of damage. Kayla found herself impressed despite her initial skepticism. The human's calm, almost serene approach contrasted sharply with the frenetic energy she normally relied on. The nebula's dangers were many, yet with him in the seat beside her, she felt a strange confidence she had never experienced before. As the ship navigated deeper into the nebula, the danger escalated. A sudden energy storm erupted, lightning-like arcs striking the hull with violent force. The warning alarms blared, red lights flashing across the deck. Kayla gritted her teeth and began rerouting power to the shields while manually adjusting the engines to counter the storm's impact. Daniel's hands moved over the secondary controls, shifting the ship in ways she would never have predicted. "Brace for turbulence," he said calmly. "Follow my lead." Kayla felt her stomach flip, but Daniel remained steady. His calm voice, his precise movements, guided the ship through the storm like a practiced dancer moving through a dangerous ballroom. Minutes felt like hours, but finally the worst of the storm passed. The Aurora's veil emerged from the chaotic swirl, battered but intact. Kayla leaned back, taking a deep breath. The human beside her did the same, his face calm, almost expressionless. "You handled that well," Kayla said, her voice carrying both relief and surprise. "Better than I expected." He had read the ship, the nebula, and the threats, adjusting in ways that complemented her own logic. He was not reckless. He was observant, creative, and fearless in the face of danger. This was the human advantage she had heard about in reports, but seeing it in action was far more compelling than reading about it. The rest of the crew watched quietly, some still skeptical of the human pilot. Yet even the most cautious officers could not deny the results. The Aurora's veil had survived the energy storm, avoided the drones, and maintained the convoy's safety. Daniel had done it without shouting, without panic, simply by observing and acting calmly. Kayla's mind began to change. Perhaps humans were not simply unpredictable creatures prone to mistakes. Perhaps they offered something more, an ability to see solutions where others saw only danger, to remain calm when logic alone might fail. She found herself glancing at the empty seat no more. It had been filled, and in doing so, had begun to redefine her understanding of courage and skill. As the ship moved deeper, Daniel began pointing out potential hazards in a quiet, matter-of-fact way. "The energy density is increasing slightly ahead. If we adjust by 2 degrees, we can avoid the stronger currents without slowing the convoy." The hours passed with a tense but steady rhythm. Kayla and Daniel worked in synchrony, their actions complementing one another. For the first time, she realized that partnership was not just about following commands. It was about trust, observation, and shared responsibility. And she had never trusted anyone like this before. Suddenly, a sharp alarm sounded, different from the usual warnings. Kayla's eyes widened as she studied the screen. "Strange readings," she said. "Unknown energy signatures. They're moving in a formation I haven't seen before. Prepare evasive maneuvers. I'll calculate the safest path through their pattern." Every calculation she made, every instinct he followed, blended seamlessly into a coordinated dance of survival. Minutes passed in tense silence. The energy signatures shifted, then retreated, leaving the Aurora's veil intact. The ship's hull had minor scratches, but the systems were stable. Kayla exhaled, finally allowing herself a smile. She glanced at Daniel. "You were remarkable." The nebula still stretched ahead, filled with unknown dangers and energy storms that could strike at any moment. But for the first time, Kayla did not feel alone. She had learned that humans, for all their unpredictability, could rise to challenges in ways Xyrans could not. Their strength was not in rigid logic or flawless calculations. It was in adaptability, intuition, and an unshakable calm under pressure. As the Aurora's veil glided past the fading streaks of the last energy currents, Kayla allowed herself a rare thought. Perhaps this mission would not only test her skills, but also her understanding of what it truly meant to be brave. And perhaps in the seat beside her, she had already found the companion who could teach her that lesson. The stars beyond the nebula shone brightly, a reminder of the vast unknown that awaited them. Kayla focused on the human beside her, realizing that the empty seat had never been empty after all. It had simply been waiting for someone who could fill it with calm confidence and quiet courage, the human pilot who had chosen it so calmly, and who was now proving that humanity could shine even in the darkest reaches of space. The Aurora's veil moved cautiously through the outer edge of the Urith Nebula. The colorful clouds of energy stretched endlessly around them, twisting and sparkling as if alive. Lieutenant Kayla's eyes darted from the viewport to the control panels, scanning every reading with meticulous care. She had begun to trust the human beside her, Daniel Reeves, but the nebula was unpredictable, and trust alone would not keep them safe. Daniel sat calmly, his hands resting lightly on the secondary controls. His presence was steady, a quiet counterpoint to Kayla's tense energy. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was precise and helpful, offering suggestions or pointing out small anomalies she might have missed. Kayla found herself glancing at him more often than she cared to admit. There was a strange reassurance in his calm confidence, a sense that, no matter what the nebula threw at them, he would find a way to handle it. Suddenly, the ship jolted sharply. Warning lights flashed across the deck, and the hull vibrated as an unexpected energy surge hit them from the side. Kayla's fingers moved quickly over the controls, recalibrating shields and adjusting thrusters. "Energy spike from starboard, divert power to shields," she shouted, her voice tense but controlled. Daniel's hands moved in perfect synchronization with hers. "I'm stabilizing the engines and rerouting auxiliary power. Follow my lead." The hum of the engines grew louder, vibrating through the deck like a heartbeat, steady but strained. Kayla's mind raced, calculating probabilities and contingencies, while Daniel's movements remained fluid and instinctive, countering the nebula's unpredictable currents. Minutes passed in tense silence. The warning lights faded and the ship stabilized. Kayla allowed herself a brief exhale, leaning back slightly in her chair. She had expected this part of the nebula to be difficult, but the reality was far more intense than any simulation or calculation had suggested. "We need to move carefully," Kayla said, her voice low but firm. "The convoy is vulnerable if we encounter more of these surges. I've noticed a pattern in the energy fluctuations. If we follow it closely, we can predict where the next spike will occur and adjust the ship's path accordingly. Watch the currents over the next few minutes and you'll see." Kayla adjusted the ship's path according to the pattern, following Daniel's subtle guidance. The ship moved more smoothly, gliding between the surges with increasing confidence. Kayla felt a mix of astonishment and admiration. The human beside her had an uncanny ability to perceive patterns she had never noticed, to anticipate dangers before they fully materialized. It was not luck, it was skill, intuition, and calm reasoning combined. As they navigated deeper into the nebula, another threat appeared. On the radar, multiple fast-moving objects approached the ship, moving in coordinated formations. Kayla's heart tightened. "Rogue drones," she said, her voice steady but tense. "They've found us again. Their movement is too precise. These are intelligent units, likely designed to test intruders. We need to be careful." "Adjust trajectory to avoid direct confrontation," Daniel said quietly. "I can guide the ship through their formation without engaging them directly." The ship twisted and weaved through the formations, gliding between the drones' paths with uncanny precision. Daniel's hands moved lightly over the controls, anticipating each move the drones might make. Kayla followed his guidance, adjusting shields and engines to complement his maneuvers. The two of them moved as one, a synchronized team navigating an unpredictable and dangerous environment. Minutes stretched like hours as the drones tested them, their energy pulses striking dangerously close to the ship. Kayla's mind worked furiously, calculating risks, but Daniel's calm presence kept her focused. He suggested subtle adjustments, minor shifts in trajectory that made all the difference. By the time the drones gave up pursuit, the Aurora's veil had passed through their formation without a scratch. Kayla exhaled, her tail flicking with a mix of relief and respect. She glanced at Daniel. "You've done this before," she said quietly, not as a question but as a statement of acknowledgement. Daniel shrugged lightly. "I've handled similar situations. Not exactly like this, but enough to know how to stay calm and find solutions." The ship moved deeper into the nebula and new challenges arose. Energy storms became more frequent, their intensity growing with each passing moment. The hull groaned under the pressure, warning alarms flashing intermittently. Kayla's hands were constantly at the controls, adjusting shields, engines, and navigation systems. But Daniel remained calm, guiding her subtly, offering precise suggestions without demanding control. At one point, a massive surge of energy struck the rear of the ship, threatening to disable the engines. Kayla reacted immediately, rerouting power to maintain stability. Daniel simultaneously adjusted the ship's pitch, redirecting the energy away from critical systems. The ship tilted violently, the deck shaking beneath them, but they remained on course. Kayla felt a surge of respect. The human's calm under pressure was not mere confidence. It was skill, intuition, and a deep understanding of both the ship and the environment. She had trained for years to handle situations like this, yet Daniel's presence made it easier, more manageable, and in some ways more precise. Hours passed in tense coordination. Kayla and Daniel communicated mostly through subtle gestures and occasional brief commands. The nebula continued to challenge them with unpredictable currents, energy surges, and intelligent threats. But together, they navigated each obstacle with increasing confidence, their teamwork becoming seamless. Finally, as the ship emerged from a particularly turbulent section of the nebula, Kayla allowed herself a brief moment of relief. The stars beyond the nebula stretched endlessly, a calm reminder of the vast space waiting ahead. The convoy had passed safely through the most dangerous sector so far, and the Aurora's veil remained intact. Kayla glanced at Daniel. "I underestimated humans," she admitted quietly, almost to herself. "I thought you were reckless, unpredictable, but you see patterns we cannot, react where we hesitate, and remain calm when others would panic. We all have our strengths. You provided the calculations, the logic. I provided a different perspective. Together, we made it through." Daniel had chosen that seat calmly, without hesitation, and in doing so, had proven that humans could rise to challenges in ways Xyrans could not anticipate. The rest of the crew watched quietly, some still cautious, but even the most skeptical officers could not deny the results. The human pilot had guided the ship through impossible turbulence, avoided intelligent threats, and demonstrated an ability to remain calm under extreme pressure. Kayla began to understand why humans were valued despite their differences. Their strength lay not in conformity, precision, or strict adherence to protocol. It lay in creativity, adaptability, and courage in the face of uncertainty. As the ship continued its journey through the nebula, Kayla allowed herself a rare thought. Perhaps this mission was not just a test of navigation skills or combat readiness. Perhaps it was a test of perception, trust, and the ability to recognize strength where it was least expected. And perhaps, in the seat beside her, she had already found that strength. The nebula stretched ahead, vast and unpredictable, filled with unknown dangers and challenges. Yet Kayla did not feel fear as she had at the beginning of the journey. She felt a cautious optimism, a sense that, with Daniel beside her, they could face whatever the universe threw at them. The seat next to her, once empty and filled with uncertainty, had become a symbol of partnership, courage, and the unexpected brilliance of humanity. As the Aurora's veil glided through the swirling clouds of energy, Kayla allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. The mission was far from over, and challenges awaited them in the heart of the nebula. But for the first time, she felt that she was not alone. The human pilot beside her was calm, capable, and unshakable, proving that even in the vast, unpredictable reaches of space, humans could rise to greatness. Kayla leaned back slightly in her chair, watching the patterns of the nebula with a new sense of respect. Daniel's quiet presence beside her was no longer a source of tension, but a source of strength. The empty seat had been filled, and in doing so, it had begun to teach her a lesson she would never forget. Sometimes, true skill is not just in following rules or calculations, but in seeing the unseen, staying calm when the unexpected strikes, and trusting others to rise to the challenge. The Aurora's veil drifted deeper into the Earth nebula, where the energy currents grew wilder, unpredictable, and more dangerous with each passing moment. The swirling clouds of color stretched like molten glass, cracking and sparking as though the nebula itself were alive. Lieutenant Kayla's eyes darted constantly between the viewport and her console. The empty seat beside her had long since been filled, but its presence was no less significant. Daniel Reeves, the human pilot, remained calm, steady, and observant, his hands lightly moving over the controls as if the ship were an extension of his own body. Kayla's mind raced. The mission had already tested her nerves and skills beyond anything she had imagined. But as they approached a particularly dense cluster of energy currents, she realized that the true test was about to begin. "Lieutenant Kayla," Daniel said softly, breaking the tense silence, "the readings ahead are unusual. The energy is unstable, and there are multiple signatures that resemble the drones we encountered before, but they're different. Smarter, more coordinated. They might be attempting to trap us. We're responsible for the convoy. If we get caught, everyone could be destroyed." It was unnerving at first, but now she realized it was exactly what they needed. The ship's sensors began to pick up dozens of moving objects ahead. They were fast, agile, and forming a semicircle around the convoy. Kayla's mind calculated the odds, slim at best, and yet Daniel's quiet confidence steadied her nerves. "They're intelligent," she muttered. "And highly adaptive." The Aurora's veil tilted and weaved between the objects with precision that seemed almost impossible. Each pulse of energy from the enemy drones was met with a subtle countermove from Daniel, the ship gliding just out of reach of destruction. "Hold steady," Daniel said calmly. Minor adjustments now, and we're clear. Within moments, they had passed the formation, leaving the drones behind as the Aurora's veil moved into a slightly calmer section of the nebula. Kayla exhaled slowly. Her tail flicked nervously as she glanced at Daniel. "You anticipated every move," she said, admiration clear in her voice. Daniel shook his head slightly. "Not anticipated, observed and reacted. Patterns are everywhere if you know how to see them." The ship's sensors picked up another anomaly, a massive energy storm forming ahead. Its pulsing waves were visible even through the thick nebula clouds, radiating intense heat and electricity. Kayla's heart sank. "We can't go around it. The convoy won't survive the delay. We have to go through it. But we'll need precise timing and coordinated maneuvers. I'll guide the ship through, but I'll need you to maintain full control of the engines and shields." The human had already guided them through impossible turbulence, and she believed he could do it again. The energy storm hit them with full force. Lightning-like arcs struck the ship's hull, and alarms blared as the shielding systems struggled to compensate. Kayla's hands moved quickly, rerouting power to stabilize critical systems. Daniel's fingers flew across the secondary controls, adjusting the ship's pitch, trajectory, and energy output with precision. The deck shook violently as the ship was thrown to one side, then the other, navigating through waves of energy that could tear it apart. Kayla's training allowed her to react quickly, but Daniel's calm guidance turned what could have been chaos into a controlled challenge. He anticipated the storm's peaks, shifting the ship at exactly the right moment, allowing them to glide through the deadliest sections. Minutes felt like hours. Every nerve in Kayla's body screamed tension, but she could not help but marvel at the human's skill. He did not panic, he did not overreact. He simply observed, calculated instinctively, and acted with precise timing. Finally, the Aurora's veil emerged from the storm, battered but intact. Sparks flew from minor hull damage, and some of the convoy's support vessels had taken light hits, but overall they had survived. Kayla exhaled, a mixture of relief and respect washing over her. "You were incredible," she said quietly, glancing at Daniel. I did not think we could survive that storm." She felt her own nerves settle, her mind sharpening as they moved further into the nebula. The next challenge arrived almost immediately. A sudden anomaly appeared on the sensors, a massive gravitational distortion pulling the ship toward an unseen center. Kayla's heart raced as she calculated the risk. "A gravity well," she muttered. "It wasn't on any maps. We'll need to counter it with reverse thrusters and minor course corrections. I'll guide the timing, but we have to act precisely." Daniel remained calm, guiding her through a series of maneuvers that seemed almost impossible. The ship spun, twisted, and tilted under the strain, yet they stayed on course. Kayla's trust in him had grown so strong that she did not hesitate for a single second. Every instinct she had was aligned with his guidance, and together they countered the gravitational pull, moving the Aurora's veil safely past the anomaly. Kayla exhaled, her tail flicking slowly in relief. You really are remarkable," she admitted. "I've never seen anyone handle situations like that. It's about staying calm, observing, and acting at the right moment. Anyone can do it with practice." Now she realized that the seat had never been empty. It had been waiting for someone who could see the ship, the nebula, and the dangers around them in a way Xyrans could not. Hours passed as they navigated the nebula. The energy currents continued to challenge them, but Kayla and Daniel moved in perfect synchronization. They communicated with subtle gestures, brief words, and shared understanding. The ship responded to their combined efforts, gliding through hazards that would have destroyed any uncoordinated crew. By the time the Aurora's veil emerged from the densest part of the nebula, Kayla felt a deep sense of respect and gratitude. The human beside her had proven time and again that bravery was not about recklessness, but about calm, precise action in the face of extreme danger. She glanced at Daniel, a rare smile touching her lips. "You've changed my understanding of humans," she said quietly. I doubted you when you first arrived. I thought you were reckless, unpredictable. But you are something else entirely." The empty seat beside her had become a symbol of something far greater: the power of collaboration, the strength found in calm courage, and the unexpected brilliance of humanity. As the stars began to reappear beyond the nebula, Kayla leaned back slightly, feeling a rare sense of hope. The mission was far from over, but for the first time she did not feel fear. With Daniel beside her, she knew they could face whatever the universe threw at them. The seat next to her, once empty and filled with uncertainty, had become a seat of trust, courage, and partnership. And Kayla knew that the journey ahead, no matter how dangerous, would never be faced alone again. The Aurora's veil glided into the final stretch of the Earth Nebula, its hull battered but intact, and its crew weary but determined. The colors of the swirling energy clouds had begun to thin, yet the danger had not lessened. Reports from the convoy indicated that the rogue, intelligent drones were regrouping, forming a concentrated attack that would test every ounce of skill the crew possessed. Lieutenant Kayla's eyes were sharp, scanning the instruments and the viewport. The seat beside her, once empty and filled with doubt, now held Lieutenant Daniel Reeves, the human pilot whose calm confidence had become the anchor of her own focus. Kayla felt a mixture of fatigue and tension. The nebula had already challenged them beyond any simulation she had ever trained for. Energy storms, intelligent drones, gravitational anomalies, they had faced them all. Yet the final stretch promised a confrontation like none before. The drones ahead were moving fast, their formation precise, and the convoy's vessels were still vulnerable. Kayla knew that even a small mistake could lead to catastrophic losses. "Lieutenant Kayla," Daniel said, his calm voice cutting through the tense hum of the ship. "We are approaching the drone's central cluster. Their energy signatures indicate coordinated attack patterns. We need to act strategically, not reactively. I'll guide the ship, but I need you to handle the shields and engines precisely. Timing will be everything." There was no room for hesitation, no margin for error. The convoy depended on them, and failure was not an option. The drone's formation became visible through the ship's sensors, dozens of fast, angular ships moving in perfect synchronization. They reacted to every energy spike, every minor adjustment in trajectory. Kayla's calculations indicated that engaging them directly would result in heavy losses. The only viable option was to guide the Aurora's veil through the center of their formation using a combination of prediction, precise timing, and evasive maneuvers. Daniel's fingers danced over the secondary controls, guiding the ship with calm precision. "Follow my lead," he instructed. "We'll use the energy currents to our advantage. The drones expect linear movement. We will move unpredictably within predictable patterns. It will confuse them long enough for the convoy to pass safely." The ship twisted and tilted, gliding between energy currents that threatened to tear it apart. Lightning-like arcs of energy struck near the hull, and warning alarms blared intermittently. Yet Daniel's calm guidance allowed her to anticipate each spike, to counter it before it could do significant damage. Minutes stretched like hours. The drones moved with ruthless efficiency, but the Aurora's veil matched them move for move, slipping through the gaps in their formation with a grace that belied the chaos around them. Kayla's mind raced, calculating trajectories, energy flow, and shield distribution, yet she could not deny that Daniel's instinctive adjustments were saving them as much as her own calculations. At one point, a massive energy surge hit the ship from the side, throwing it violently. Kayla's fingers flew over the controls, rerouting power to maintain stability, but Daniel anticipated her moves. "Tilt starboard 15 degrees, then reverse thrust," he said calmly. She followed without hesitation, and the ship's hull groaned but remained intact. The convoy began to move in formation behind them, guided by the Aurora's veil. Kayla felt a surge of responsibility. Every adjustment she made could mean the difference between survival and destruction for dozens of ships. Yet she also felt a growing sense of trust. Trust in Daniel, trust in their teamwork, and trust in the human ability to perceive and act where logic alone might fail. Another wave of drones approached, faster and more aggressive than the previous ones. Kayla tensed, but Daniel's calm voice kept her focused. "We will use the central energy vortex ahead. It will slow them and give us a tactical advantage. I'll guide the ship through it, but shields must remain at maximum." The drones pursued them relentlessly, their energy pulses striking dangerously close to the Aurora's veil. Kayla's hands moved expertly, her mind focused entirely on keeping the ship stable. Daniel's guidance was subtle but precise, suggesting tiny adjustments that allowed them to glide through the heart of the vortex without serious damage. The drones collided with the outer edges of the vortex, their formations disrupted by the unpredictable energy currents. Kayla watched as Daniel guided the ship in smooth, controlled arcs, each movement countering the nebula's chaos while exploiting the drones' momentary disorientation. It was a delicate balance of skill, intuition, and trust. Minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by the hum of the engines and the occasional alarm. Finally, the Aurora's veil emerged from the vortex, and the drone's formation had broken apart. The convoy passed safely behind them, moving out of immediate danger. Kayla allowed herself a deep breath, her tail flicking slowly in relief. "You did it," she said quietly, glancing at Daniel. I don't know how to thank you. Without your calm, your guidance, we would have lost half the convoy." She realized that the empty seat beside her had never been about hierarchy, protocol, or even skill alone. It had been about partnership, trust, and the willingness to rise to challenges together. Daniel had chosen that seat calmly, without hesitation, and in doing so had proven that humans could complement Zyran precision with creativity, intuition, and courage under pressure. The ship moved into calmer space, the nebula's energy currents fading into the distance. The convoy regrouped, its vessels intact and operational. Kayla allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had doubted humans at first, expecting recklessness and unpredictability. Yet Daniel had shown her something extraordinary, the ability to remain calm in chaos, to see patterns where others saw randomness, and to act decisively without hesitation. As the stars of open space stretched beyond the nebula, Kayla felt a sense of pride and admiration. Humans, she realized, possessed a brilliance that complemented Zyran's skill in ways that were not immediately obvious. They were courageous not because they sought danger, but because they remained calm and resourceful when faced with it. "Lieutenant Daniel," Kayla said quietly, her voice carrying a mix of respect and gratitude, "I have learned something important on this mission. Humans, they have a strength that is hard to measure, but it is real. And you have shown me exactly what that strength is." The nebula had tested them beyond expectation, yet the mission had also taught her a lesson she would never forget. The empty seat beside her, once a symbol of uncertainty, had become a symbol of partnership, courage, and the unexpected brilliance of humanity. The convoy moved steadily through open space, the danger of the nebula behind them. Kayla allowed herself a small smile.